The views expressed in this video are solely those of the host and the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization or entity that may be affiliated with. We encourage the viewer to conduct their own research.
I want to start today with a bit of a thought experiment.
Oh, I like these.
It's a little sci-fi, so just stick with me. Imagine it's today, right now, 2026, and a completely new consumer product just appears on store shelves.
Okay.
It's this small white cylinder packed with dried leaves. You light one end on fire, and you suck the smoke into your lungs.
I think I see where you're going. You're reintroducing the cigarette.
But here's the twist. In this world, history is wiped clean. No one has ever heard of a cigarette. We have no studies on lung cancer, no concept of emphysema. It's a total mystery.
Okay, so tabula rasa. A blank slate.
So the question is this. Using the technology we have right now, our supercomputers, our genetic sequencing, all of it, how long would it take for science to prove that this new thing kills people?
Honestly, weeks.
Weeks.
Yeah, maybe a few months to be absolutely certain of the precise mechanism, but definitely not years.
That's so fast.
Yeah.
Because in our world, the real world, it took us half a century to get everyone to agree.
It would be incredibly fast today. I mean, if that mystery stick was introduced as a new product, it wouldn't even make it past safety testing. We wouldn't be waiting for death certificates to pile up.
We'd see the damage sooner.
We'd see the molecular chaos it causes almost the instant it touched human cells.
And yet, we hear this argument all the time about vaping, don't we? You hear it from friends, you see it in headlines. We just don't know yet.
The classic wait-and-see argument.
It took 50 years to figure out cigarettes, so we need 50 years for vapes. Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to really stress test that argument. We're going to look at why it took so long back in the 20th century, how toxicology has completely reinvented itself since then,
And what the actual biological data, the hard numbers, tell us about vaping right now.
We're basically putting the observational era of the 1960s up against the molecular era of today.
Sounds good.
Just a quick heads up before we dive in, we're focusing strictly on the physiology here.
Yeah.
We're not getting into youth trends or addiction mechanics today. This is all about the machinery of the human body and how we measure damage.
Pure toxicology. Let's do it.
So let's go back in time to that observational era. The real turning point was the early 1960s, wasn't it?
It really was. You had two bombshell reports that just shook the foundations of public health.
The Royal College of Physicians in the UK.
In 1962, and then the U.S. Surgeon General's famous report in 1964.
I was dipping into that Surgeon General's committee. I mean, this wasn't just a few people brainstorming. They reviewed something like 7,000 scientific articles.
It was a monumental effort. But, and this is the absolute key to why it took so long, the science of the 50s and 60s was almost entirely observational. They were relying on what we now call apical outcomes.
Apical outcomes. Okay, that sounds technical. Break that down.
Think of apex as the end of the line. An apical outcome is the final observable result of a disease. So a tumor, a heart attack.
Or death.
Or death, exactly.
So you can't see the disease starting. You can only see it when it's finished.
Precisely. Back then, we didn't have the tech to look inside a living cell and watch DNA get damaged in real time. We had to wait for someone to smoke for 20 years, get sick, and then we'd look at the population data and go, hey, do you see a pattern here?
It's basically the tombstone method of science. You're counting bodies.
It's crude, but yeah, that's pretty accurate. They were like detectives with a body count. Take the Hammond and Horn study from 1952.
That was a huge one.
Massive. They recruited 188,000 men across 10 states.
I mean, that's a huge sample size even for today.
It is, and they just followed them. It took about 20 months of just tracking these men before the death rate started to clearly split.
And what did they find?
They found that men who smoked regularly had a significantly higher death rate. But look at the method. They had to wait for the deaths to actually happen to prove the link.
And they were fighting against all this noise in the data, too. I saw something in the notes called the ubiquity problem.
Oh, this part is fascinating. People totally forget how different things were.
The 1962 Royal College report said that almost 70% of men in the UK were regular smokers.
70%. Just think about that.
It's hard to imagine. But the source makes a great point. When everyone is doing something, it's incredibly hard to find a control group.
Right. Smoking was so common, it was just the baseline.
It's like trying to figure out what causes a headache at a rock concert. Everyone's got one.
You just assume the headache is the normal state of being.
So because they couldn't ethically, take healthy people and force them to smoke in a lab.
Which we tend to frown upon, yes.
They had to rely on the consistency of the association.
Right. And this is why that 1964 committee had to establish the 5 criteria for causal inference. They were building a legal case, almost, not just a scientific one.
They needed to be absolutely sure.
They looked for consistency. Did the link show up in different groups? Strength, how big was the risk? Temporality, did smoking come before the disease? All these boxes had to be ticked.
And the verdict obviously was yes, but it took decades of mortality data.
It was a triumph of observation, a slow, painstaking triumph. They were waiting for the car to crash to prove the brakes were bad.
Which brings us back to our time machine. Let's get back to 2026. Why don't we need to wait for the crash anymore? What's changed?
We open the hood. We are now in the era of predictive toxicology. We have this whole suite of tools that we call NAM's new approach methodologies.
And this is where we get the omics. I see the suffix everywhere now. Genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics.
It can sound like a sci-fi language, I know, but it's actually a pretty logical system. Omics just means the totality of. So genomics is the study of all the genes. Proteomics is all the proteins.
Okay, so instead of looking for one single problem, we're scanning the whole system.
Exactly. I like to use an analogy. Think of your body as a massive, complex factory.
Okay.
In the 1960s, to see if the factory was broken, you had to stand outside and wait for smoke to pour out of the chimney.
Or wait for the building to collapse. The apical outcome.
Right. But today, omics lets us walk inside the factory, go to the control room, and read the logs from every single machine. We can see if one machine is overheating, even if the factory looks fine from the outside.
So instead of waiting 20 years for a tumor to grow,
we look for a molecular point of departure or a POD.
A point of departure, like at an airport.
In a way, yeah. In toxicology, it's the moment the cell stops acting normally and starts trying to cope with stress. We can expose human cells to a substance for maybe just 5 days and scan that cell's computer system.
And that's transcriptomics, looking at the instructions.
That's right. Your DNA is the blueprint library. Your cells transcribe specific blueprints to build what they need. When a cell is attacked by, say, cigarette smoke, it changes which blueprints it's pulling. It starts screaming for the blueprints for repair DNA or inflammation response.
You can see the cell panicking.
You can see the cells screaming for help in real time. We can see these stress pathways light up. We see DNA damage signatures. We can see this within hours or days.
So back to the car analogy. It's like plugging a diagnostic computer into the engine. You can see the brake line pressure failing right now, long before you actually hit a wall.
That's the perfect analogy. And there's a framework for this, the Transcriptomic Assessment Product, or ETAP.
Agencies like the EPA use this, right?
It's a game changer. It cuts the assessment time for a chemical from years down to months. If our hypothetical cigarette appeared today, we'd run it through this screening, we'd see thousands of toxicants, we'd see chemicals physically bonding to DNA and breaking it.
And we'd know it was a carcinogen without a single epidemiological study.
We would flag it as hazardous almost immediately. The mechanism of harm would be undeniable.
Okay, so this is the million-dollar question. We have these 21st century toxicology superpowers. We aren't flying blind. So when we point these tools, these omics, these NMs at vaping, what do we see?
We see a radically, and I mean radically, different picture than with smoking. When you look at the biomarkers, you see a massive reduction in exposure to harmful chemicals.
Let's get specific on that. Biomarker is a word that gets thrown around a lot. What are we actually measuring?
A biomarker is just, it's physical proof. It's the substance we can measure in your urine or blood that shows you've been exposed to a specific toxin. It's the smoking gun.
Okay.
And one of the most important ones is called NNAL.
NNAL, what is it?
It's what's left over after your body processes a really potent tobacco-specific carcinogen called NNK. If we find NNAL in your urine, we know your body has been fighting off that carcinogen. Smokers are loaded with it.
And if you vape exclusively?
The sources are so consistent on this. Exclusive vapors show NNAL levels that are somewhere between 86% and 97% lower than smokers.
97% lower?
Yes. In many of the studies, the levels in vapors are pretty much the same as people using nicotine patches or gum.
Wow.
Sometimes they're statistically indistinguishable from people who don't use nicotine at all.
That's not a margin of error. That's a completely different universe of risk.
It is. And it's not just NNAL. We see similar drops with things like volatile organic compounds.
Like acrolein.
Exactly. Acrolein is a major cause of lung disease and carbon monoxide. The biomarkers for those in vapors are often indistinguishable from non-smokers.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate. I know you're not going to say vaping is zero risk.
No, of course not. And any good science won't claim zero risk for anything. It's not harmless. Some biomarkers for things like acrylamide or benzene can be a little higher in vapors than in people who use nothing.
But how does that compare to smoking?
And that's the critical context that always gets lost. Even if they are slightly elevated compared to a non-user, they are still drastically orders of magnitude lower than what you see in a smoker.
It's all about the relative harm.
Exactly. The source material is clear on this again and again. Combustion is the primary vector of disease. Burning tobacco creates this chemical factory of tar and particulates. Vaping removes combustion from the equation.
But there is a huge caveat in here for people who do both, the dual users.
This might be the most critical public health message in all the data. Those huge health benefits, that massive drop in biomarkers, that's driven by complete switching.
So if you're smoking a pack a day and you just add a vape on top, you're not really helping yourself.
You are definitely not seeing the benefits we just talked about. The data shows dual users do not get that same dramatic reduction. You have to put down the combustible cigarette completely to unlock that harm reduction potential.
This leads us right to the core of this whole thing, the insufficient time fallacy. We hear it constantly. We just don't know enough yet.
And it is a fallacy because it assumes we're still using 1960s tools. It assumes the only way to know if something is dangerous is to wait 50 years and count the bodies.
But like you said, we don't use rotary phones and we don't use tombstone toxicology anymore.
We don't. The 1964 consensus on smoking was a triumph of observation. The current consensus that vaping is significantly less harmful is a product of the molecular era.
Because we know what causes the damage.
We know exactly what causes the damage in smoking. It's the tar, the CO, the high levels of carcinogens from burning things.
And we can measure those things.
We can measure with incredible precision that those things are either absent or drastically reduced in vaping aerosols. We could do a mechanism-based risk assessment right now. We don't need to wait for the apical outcome.
And yet, despite all this molecular data, public perception seems to be going in the complete opposite direction.
It's a huge and tragic disconnect.
I'm looking at the stats. In 2025, over 56% of adults in Great Britain believe that vaping is as harmful or more harmful than smoking.
And that misperception is growing. It was only 27% back in 2019.
It's mind-blowing. As the scientific certainty gets stronger, public fear gets worse. Why does that matter?
It matters because of the human cost. If you are a smoker and you genuinely believe that the alternative is just as bad as what you're doing,
why would you switch?
you wouldn't. You'd stick with the devil you know. And we know the devil kills half of its long-term users.
So this narrative, this we need more time fear, is actually a barrier to people quitting smoking.
It is. It's keeping people smoking. They're waiting for long-term data, not realizing the data we have right now on the actual toxic exposure is already incredibly clear.
So let's just summarize this. We've gone from a time travel thought experiment to molecular biology.
It's been a journey.
In the 1960s, science was basically blind. It needed body counts from epidemiology because it couldn't see inside the black box.
That's correct.
In the 2020s, science has turned on the lights. We use biomarkers, we use omics. We can see the potential for harm at a cellular level, sometimes within days.
Exactly. And when you apply those modern tools, you see that while vaping isn't risk-free, it exposes a user to just a fraction of the toxicants in smoke. The insufficient time argument is like refusing to believe a weather satellite because you prefer to wait outside and see if you get wet.
And the enemy is combustion.
Combustion is the enemy. Getting people to stop inhaling burnt tobacco is the goal.
I want to leave everyone with one final thought that really stuck with me from the research. It's about the cost of demanding perfect certainty.
Go on.
If we demand 50 years of perfect, flawless, long-time data before we accept a harm reduction tool, we are essentially demanding that another 2 generations of smokers keep using the deadliest consumer product ever invented while we wait. Is the pursuit of that perfect data worth that human cost?
That's the question we all need to be asking.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.